How can you know what a country's diplomatic relationships really are? You can usually look at it through a lens of ideology. You can see whether or not nations are aligned ideologically, though this is usually something that is overstated in its importance. You can look at it through an economic lens, which is likely the most, if not one of the most important lenses to look at it from, as its impact greatly defines what the diplomatic relationships between nations are. But our focus here will be in what we believe to be the most reliable barometer in understanding the relationships between two nations, regardless of what the current politician is saying. Our analysis that follows will focus on arms sales between nations and specifically on how the different ways in which you can figure out what the diplomatic relationships between these countries are, as well as the different ways in which arms sales define those relationships. So there are ways in which arms sales just work. So what does that mean? It means when you buy a rocket launcher, for example, or a Patriot missile system, you are locked into that technology. Think of it as an Apple product or as a printer with toner. If you are a printer company, let's say HP, and you sell a printer, you are now locking your customers in to exclusively buying your ink. And if you are not buying their ink, it's not going to work. So you see this with every country does this, whether it's Chinese arms sales, Russian arms sales, or US arms sales. This is just how the technology is manufactured.
Yeah. So, for example, there are many examples, but one interesting one is the 8 new submarines that China will build for Pakistan. And basically, on top of those submarines, they'll get 100 U-4 anti-ship torpedoes, or they'll get anti-submarine warfare torpedoes, or they'll get anti-ship missiles, and they're getting these on the like dozens and hundreds, and all of these are to supplement the submarine themselves. So you're not just getting one little thing; you're getting other stuff just to supplement it, and on top of that, you're gonna also need to rely to the other country for those types of maintenance of those systems, like submarines or air defense systems, etc.
Okay, yeah. So what follows in what we're going to talk about is not how general arms sales work. What we're going to be discussing is kind of additional bully behavior that is almost exclusive to US arms sales. And before we dive into that, just some quick things to mention. When we mention arms sales from Western nations, whether it be France, England, for example, Germany, Sweden, whatever, we're generally equating it to US arms sales, though they are different, and we will discuss their differences, but we equate them in the sense that they, in this particular discussion regarding diplomatic relationships, end up resulting in US/NATO influence in these countries or regions. Having said that, the relationships between these countries is less of a vendor-customer relationship. It's more akin to a vassal state and owner unequal relationship. Ultimately, you always have to consider who has a military base in whose country. It's not Germany that has a military base in the United States. It's the United States that has a military base in Germany or the Philippines or etc.
Yeah, and when it comes to NATO aligned countries having their own arms sales to other countries that US isn't selling to really as much for those particular reasons. One good example would be, for example, the German submarines, which basically are conventional because Germany only builds conventional submarines for themselves and the partners that they have when they buy them. And Turkey and Greece or even Korea, South Korea buys Type 209 German submarines, and the U.S. doesn't mind, doesn't interfere in that sale. But if the US thinks that it has a good reason and can gain influence, if they do so, they will interfere. And a good example would be that of the French Australian submarine deal, where French wanted to sell them 12 conventional submarines to Australia because they thought you have conventional submarines, you know how to maintain them. You don't have nuclear submarines, you don't know how to maintain them, so we're just going to sell you conventional ones so that you're set. But although France is an ally, the United States interfered in that deal and got Australia to buy very expensive nuclear submarines, which they don't know how to maintain them because they don't really have that technology, which then US would have to share it, and Australia is basically footing the bill for all the maintenance and the purchase just so that they could have nuclear submarines for the US to kind of use in case there's a conflict, which shows that the US will interfere in the arms trade of allies if they can find an interest in.
That's right. And the Germans, unlike the Americans who exclusively make nuclear powered submarines, make the different conventional diesel powered type of submarines. So, going back to what we said earlier about the additional bully behavior that Western nations, in particular the US, engage in, there are different versions of that. There is, let's say, the carrot and the stick. The stick, in this case, is if you don't buy from us, we will coup you, we will sanction you, we will no longer ever sell to you. It's very jealous ex behavior. And we even have an example of this in Turkey, isn't that right?
Yeah, so Turkey had like a big issue with surface-to-air missile defense systems because they kind of were stuck with the Hawk defense system which is a very old American one, and they wanted the new defense system because they're the second biggest army in NATO, so they kind of wanted modernized ones, and they were so desperate that they kind of were letting Patriot systems of other countries operating in Turkey just so that they could defend their airspace. And they kind of were fed up with that, so they wanted Patriot systems, and the US was kind of reneging on selling them. Turkey said that they were kind of like way too expensive on that, so they decided to just shop around, and they got the S-400 missile defense system from Russia. But at the same time, Turkey was partnering F-35. They were selling parts for the F-35, making parts, and the U.S. immediately kicked them out of the program. And on top of that, also we're gonna started doing sanctions on what's a NATO ally, which it's kind of weird when you think about it because you're in a military alliance with someone, and as soon as you don't do something that they like, they immediately go into offense.
It's like the EU sanctioning Hungary.
Yeah, it is kind of funny, and obviously, like Turkey has their own claims when saying that other NATO countries are also operating Russian/Soviet uh, air defense systems, because the classic one is Greece has S-300s and they just wanted S-400s, and they said what's the issue here, like you know we wanted Patriots, we didn't get them, and we just want something, right? Like we don't have much choice because they don't have their own building
Yeah,
capabilities
they don't
yet.
have a military industrial complex to satisfy those needs. And that's
Yet
correct. Yet,
they're looking
yet,
for it.
yet, for sure.
Yeah, they can satisfy other needs like the drones and all that, but not air defense systems like that yet. They're about to probably make them. So they just got sanctioned, which is like the stick, which is like
That's right.
if you Yeah.
So then there's, depending on the kind of leader you are, something that could be a stick or a carrot, which is economic pressure. As we mentioned previously, this comes, of course, with the arms sales, because many times these arms sales are tied to IMF loans, World Bank loans, large projects of privatization of public holdings. And while there are many arms of imperialism, our focus is to highlight the arms sales once again, just as a quick and sure way of understanding the relationship between countries. And a good example of kind of this mixing of IMF loans, which ultimately many of these loans are used to purchase these same weapons that are given, is the example of Egypt, who in the years of their largest arms purchases are also the years where they received the largest IMF loans, in particular after the arrival of their most recent president, who I want to say a year or two after coming into power, immediately took the largest loans in the country's history. Like the previous 60 years of loans don't amount to one single of the many loans that he took after his arrival.
Yeah, and you can see that they increased their, they got more and more ambitious when it comes to purchasing things. They bought, they ordered H-64, Apache helicopters and new transport aircraft, Chinooks.
Yeah, top of the
They
line.
ordered, they've ordered lots of Hellfire missiles and all that, which is like basically kind of goes with that way, and it's like an old strategy when you think about it. Those European countries used to do that with countries back in 1800s too, whereas like, oh, you accept our weapons and you also accept our aid,
Guns.
and that was the you accept our guns and also our aid, and now we kind of like have a control over what you say. It's like the
Yeah.
forms of economic and militaristic imperialism.
Yeah, 100% East India Company vibes. Yeah, so finally, then we have the carrot, the purest of carrots, which is diplomatic cover. And this is something we definitely have seen in our present day as well as historically. When you are a U.S. ally, though, I will frequently say that the U.S. is a fake friend, but if you are in the current moment a U.S. ally, then you will receive diplomatic cover from the United States if you are a useful ally to them at that point. What does this mean? It means, for example, you get to do a genocide and, the U.S. won't talk shit. You get to do a violent coup and the U.S. will support you. You can see this from everywhere, from Indonesia, Israel in the current day, Saudi Arabia, Iraq at one point, and then Iraq not at all at another point. Chile under Pinochet, Argentina, El Salvador, the list goes on.
Yeah, and they're all very interesting examples. Like if you take Israel, they've used all the power that they could have to block any Security Council measure that would be, in any way pro-Palestinian. So much that they wanted to use other countries in the Security Council to block the Palestinian membership, statehood. And then when they found out that they couldn't, they ended up being the only ones who voted against it, the U.S. So even Britain, I think, voted abstained. And whereas, for example, for Indonesia, not only did they give them the weapons to do genocide in East Timor, but it's like such a good case that of manufacturing consent, so much that it's in the book of manufacturing consent by Chomsky and Herman, that basically if you check it out, it says that the Los Angeles Times ran 16 articles dealing with East Timor, before, and then since that time, like before the invasion, and then since that time there have been a grand total of 20 news reports on East Timor and 3 op-ed pieces. So it's basically like almost nothing when the genocide unfolds, but right before it, there were plenty of articles that were being written because nothing was happening yet. And then as soon as it was happening, since it was a U.S. ally, somehow the U.S. media stays silent. It continues to go on. U.S. gives diplomatic cover internationally and domestically so that there's no protests against Indonesia in the country.
Yeah. And speaking of vetoes, just last year, and the number's definitely gone up, obviously, since last year, the U.S. has vetoed anything relating to Israel 45 times, which is more than anyone else and more than half of all the vetoes that the U.S. has ever done. So
Yeah,
the diplomatic cover is definitely a very nice carrot if you are engaged in these kinds of horrifying activities.
Yeah, so that's kind of comes. That's like the top of the package, but then the sticks kind of come later when you aren't behaving as well.
Yeah, just ask Saddam Hussein. So
They got to experience all of it.
yeah, he got the full gamut. So how can you see this then? Right? I'm not I don't work at the Pentagon. How do I know what arms sales are? It's as easy as Wikipedia. And if you want to go a little bit more in depth, you can take a look at the kind of databases we're looking at, which is called CPRI, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a Swedish NGO that tracks arms sales. And with these tools, you can just, scroll through and you can see it change over time as well. You can ask yourself, well, look at all these arms sales that Iran has made from the US. Aren't these enemies? Well, yes. Before 1979, they were allies and they had a ton of arms sales, which is why they have such a massive fleet of American airplanes. But after the Iranian Revolution, in parentheses, except for the Iran-Contra affair, you can see how the Iranian government has moved away from exclusive U.S. arms purchases and instead has opted for more domestic or alternative nations for their arms purchases.
Yeah, so you can say that, for example, CIPRI says that the order year for the AGM 45A strike anti-radar missiles that they were going to get from US through, this was short times. They got only, they ordered 25 and they got 25, but they were going to get even more than that. But then they said, the CIPRI has a comment that says the rest of the order was cancelled after the 1979 Iranian Revolution. So you can see the change over time where like all the orders that you did, if something happens that the supplier country doesn't like, it will cancel all the orders. Obviously,
and pocket the money.
Minus, yeah. Yeah. If you paid for it, it would be pretty bad. It'd be pretty bad if you paid for all of it and now they have the money. But yeah, can happen.
Yeah. So hopefully, after all this, you're now able to, listen to somebody like Erdogan, the president of Turkey, say, Israel is the worst. Israel is X, Y, and Z. Well, you can just look up the arms sales and military ties between Turkey and Israel, and you'll have a much better understanding of whether what's coming out of the president of Turkey's mouth are just words or if there is substance and meaning behind those words.
Yeah, and you can see the change. I think Erdogan was much lenient on Israel, although he said like he was aggressive back in the day, like a decade ago, right? But he didn't do any he didn't take any actions on those words, because I think there were still some military ties back then, whereas now I think those military ties have kind of vanished, and whatever economic ties that they were, Turkey did sanction them harshly, so you can see that I think he didn't mean it back then, even though he was saying it, whereas now he means it much more, because you can see the actual change, not only in military but also in economic ties of that country. So you should pay less attention on the rhetoric, but you should see that rhetoric and what comes from that rhetoric. Does it come like with uh, military ties being cut, or economic ties being cut, or does it just not change anything and you just said bad words that day and then moved on?
Exactly. Yeah, it's like what's the other one? Joe Biden secretly is calling Netanyahu a son of a bitch or whatever. It's like, okay, and then he sells them $1 billion in weapons. Like, oh wow, clearly he thinks very poorly of him. No.
Yeah, well, he hates him so much that he wants to like continue the war. It's like, wow.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, thanks for listening, and that's it.